Hi, Ori. It's good to see you.
Hi, Talley.
I'm excited to connect virtually. I'm here at the gallery in Dallas. Even though we are still close to the public, we're kind of easing out of our shelter in place, but things are very, very quiet here while most all of us are working from home. But it's wonderful to see you and get to talk to you about how are things in London.
Pretty disastrous.
Yeah.
The death toll is very high. It's like nearly 31,000 in the UK. So London is completely shut down. Yesterday, our Prime Minister came with an announcement. They're trying to ease things up a little bit, but it's not going to be dramatic. So all public transport are closed. People are allowed to work, but in very limited capacity. And when you can't travel, it's kind of, of course, our kids are at home. We're doing homeschooling, and it's very demanding. And I do a lot of work here at home, and I'm working on the VR project that I shot at the Intel studio. I'm working together there with Diego Perlowski, who's the director of the studio. We developed a project. We talk about it maybe later. It's a very ambitious project. So we're able to do a lot of the editing. I work with my animator online. We set up, it's called Team Viewer platform, which means that I can give them access to my computer. So each one got their own computer, each one got their own headset. And the way we're working is that things can be uploaded. So computer can be controlled from a distance. And then I can go through the experience, review things, we're feedbacking each other. So we were working for the last 2 months that way. And we're having Zoom calls, and we can share some of the experiences with the rest of the team. So we made a lot of progress in this respect. So, we're finding ways to go by.
That's good to hear. I mean, you're working in a format right now that you can collaborate clearly and work pretty well remotely.
Yeah, so with the VR, it's really good. With my photographic practice, it's a little bit more challenging because I need a lot of material. And it's very difficult to source stuff, and it just requires a lot more interaction. But now I come around it, and we are starting to work. So I'm really trying to push out and to produce new things that hopefully will be ready in the next few months.
Well, I've been spending time looking. I think we've all been looking a lot at everything we can see digitally and remotely, and looking at artist clips. And I've really enjoyed looking back at your work and watching some of the audio and film things you can find on the internet about series of yours. And so much of your work is fitting to this time we're in, I think. And it seems to carry, whatever time it is, there's kind of layers of messages that we find in your work. And now with this pandemic and the lockdown and just what's kind of happening in the world, I think it puts a little bit of a twist on things as I consider your work. Have you reflected on your work and thinking about past series? I know you're actively working on the future projects, but have you thought about how your work fits into kind of this new normal we're finding ourselves in?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think about it all the time. So the work that I've done in the past is consequential for this, way of thinking. And I think that the tension that exists between the physical and the virtual is really at the core of what I'm doing. And I will say my background is photography, and when I started photography, it was analog, and photography already lived through this dramatic revolution, moving from analog into the digital, and it's something that we all experiencing in different capacity. But throughout when I arrived to university in 1989, and we got the first Apple computers, and Photoshop arrived, and it was quite dramatic, and there were a lot of resistance, and people have to kind of, come to terms with this. I think some of the thing with the art world is facing now is this relationship between physical, brick and mortar, digital platform. It's part of the same process. We are going through a revolution that started probably at the end of the 20th century, but definitely defined by the 21st century. These are still the early days of this revolution, and I think that it will outreach, and it will change dramatically the way we operate, the way we perceive the world. I mean, my main interest, in the VR project, which I'm doing now, it's not just any VR. I'm actually, the project is being shot at the Intel studio. This is the studios that Diego set up, and it's very much, what's unique about it that we are filming real people. We are filming real objects. It still keep the relationship, which I'm always very much interested, between optics that absorbing events that happening in the sensual physical world, and then taking it into another realm. So there is always a relationship, and this is throughout my work, between the camera as a witness of an event that actually happening in the sensual world that we know and experience, but then there is a transformation that is occurring. And what is really interesting for me is that, in this project, part of it is the project called Letters and Towers, and the whole work is exploring the threshold between physical and virtual. So the premise was that I start with working with encyclopedias, which are books that contain so much knowledge, and they're physical objects. The small objects that the knowledge contained inside is so much greater than the sum of a single volume. And encyclopedias used to be something so precious, and they existed almost in every household. It was a desirable object that every household was, kind of dying for. And now I find them at the side of the road. I buy them on eBay from all around the world for no money whatsoever, because the digital form replace them. So the physical, we're kind of passing through this threshold when the physical world is melting down and information is taking over. The whole work is around these relationships. So we're filming, the protagonists are human figures that are moving in the space in different ways. Some of them are walking on high wires, some of them are climbing on rope. Occasionally they fall, and when they fall, because the way we film them, we're capturing them is in pixels, but not flat pixel like a photograph, but three-dimensional pixel. We call it volumetric. So each pixel, as you imagine in a photograph, in a digital image, will have 2 dimensions, and a lot of them create the image. If you imagine that you can move around each pixel, it's you have 6 faces to it. And each pixel can be pulled out or brought together. So these figures are really, you can move all around them, you can really experience them, but you can also create a velocity, and they can fall apart. So the physical figures mixed together with the whole narrative, where you're starting in a physical world that slowly melt down, and when sentences breaking into words breaking into letters, and letters start to lose all meaning, and then kind of coming together into words. This kind of whole relationship of how we make sense of the world, and the desire of encyclopedia to categorize the world and to own all knowledge. And now we're living in a digital age that we have almost democratic and infinite access to knowledge, but with it, what starts to be lost is the loss of authority, the loss of an author, and with it, the loss of a phenomenon, or the notion of truth. So we have all this question of what is truth, how truth is defined, this question that existing about fake news or fake truth. And for me, the medium of photography is at the heart of it, and that's why I talked about the optics, because the camera is recording something that actually exists in front of the lens. The camera is a witness to something that, can be defined as objectively being there, because all the camera can record is light that is bouncing back from a physical object. You can't photograph something that is not there. There cannot be, abstraction in true photographic sense. You can create abstract images using light, but not abstract photography, this kind of relationship. And that's what I'm trying to stay truthful to. And this whole VR experience is another step. So we talked about, projects from the past like Blow Up and On Reflection. I'm constantly moving in this direction. In Blow Up, I capture an event in such a speed, so the camera is capturing a moment that the eye and the brain, optically the eye can capture, can absorb, but the brain cannot process. So events that are happening in times that can be conceived as metaphysical time, times that we cannot experience, the folds of time. When I move to On Reflection, I put the flowers in front of a mirror and I capture the mirror disintegrating, and I have two cameras. One focusing on the glass itself, which is the physical entity that I'm looking at, and the second on the reflection in the glass, which is the virtual image that's created, but there's no physical presence whatsoever. So once again, this kind of relationship between the physical world and then the virtual world, and the fact that they are melting to one into another. And in the VR, it's kind of, I think it's really materialized. So you're starting in physical, ideally, I envisage it as a physical installation. Today, when we're living in a time of social distancing, physical installation may be more challenging. Although what the VR can offer, which is quite interesting, we can create different stations where people experience it together, but far apart, so they are not at any danger. No one can get contaminated or infected, but they can have a common experience because each one experiencing something that the other do too. So you have a commonality. You come to a space, each one is going to a different physical environment, experiencing a virtual experience that is common, and then kind of living together. So I'm kind of very much thinking constantly about this relationship. What does this mean? And we talked earlier on about our children playing Fortnite or playing Roblox, and they are living in avatar spaces, and they have all these friends, and they're kind of already, the threshold between the physical and the digital is such that, we can't, this meltdown should be really welcome. And I know that the situation we're living through at the moment is truly unfortunate and tragic in many ways, but it also creates opportunities. I would like to say, because I'm writing a lot at the moment. I actually spend about 4 or 5 hours a day writing. I wake up at 5 in the morning and my morning start with writing. And for what I'm trying to write, I'm reading a lot. And I came across two things that were very interesting and very relevant. So when Isaac Newton were at university, a pandemic started and the studies stopped for 2 years. And this is the time where actually he came with his great discoveries. He was staying at his grandmother's estate, and a lot of the discoveries that led into the 3 laws of gravity that kind of emerged through this time. And another book that I was reading, which is Barbaric in the Garden, it described the city of Siena, and Siena lived through the plague. About 75% of the population was wiped off, and the city went into a complete chaos and anarchy. That kind of things emerged out of. It reached a point where people kind of lost all sense of law and order. Everything became so meaningless. And I think that one of the things that could come out of this pandemic and out of this crisis is in new realizations that will actually really help our society to transform and to actually push forward. So if we could try to embrace the reality that we live in now and try to think about the opportunities that it creates, it may lead to prevent disastrous situation in the future, but also lead us to places that could be very creative, very productive, and even enchanting in many ways.
Right. I think that's you've touched on so many things I agree with. I'm fascinated by the VR experience. My team, my colleagues, Meredith and Trini and I went to Los Angeles to see you in November while you were filming the Letters and Towers with the actors and very athletic actors that had tremendous physical skill. Could you mention, I think that just the element of combining VR with actual images of real people versus animated, artificial images, how important that is to you, and kind of, I feel like the presence, the the visual, the physical presence that these actors had, and their visual presence was so intense. The whole experience was so intense. It was wonderful to have a front row seat to the filming of this. But could you speak a little bit to, I have a couple of questions. In your series, I think about the work, still life work and figurative work. And the figure you see more in film when I think of your work, and the still life more in the still imagery. But with this VR project, you're combining the still life and the figure. And kind of speak to that, and also just speak to working with people and how important they were to the visuals of this.
Yeah, so like I said, one of my main interests in working in the VR environment is the introduction of real people, or optics that capturing the real world. So this and raising question about what reality is, how we perceive, how technology is affecting our perception of the world and defining reality. And I think that this was fundamental. If everything was CGI, I mean, of course, it creates a fantastic reality, but I'm very much interested in this question: what is the threshold? Where is reality? Where do we believe? How we define truth? How we define our moral position in the world? And often it's depending on something that we have to believe in, that we have to believe in some sort of truth. And this truth is emerging out of often of our sensual experiences. Although we know that our sensual experiences are very deceptive. So there is a kind of a paradox there that I'm kind of really trying to mold and to work with and to think through. So so of course, bringing real people into the VR is definitely part of this experience. Yeah, there were extremely fit people because we worked on, in kind of extreme scenarios. What I wanted to do is, although the shot was in the studio, and this is some sort of relation to my still life, is to create in a very controlled environment a situation and scenarios that are uncontrollable. So invited accidents to happen, and then the camera is recording something that is authentic, that cannot be repeated. So we worked, I kind of created, I was imagining some sort of existential scenarios where somebody walked on a wire. I was thinking very much about the Nietzsche's image from So Said Zarathustra, about describing this men as a bridge, and this whole kind of process of going through, and the risk of falling down, and the struggles through life. So it was these sort of images, and of course they're walking on wire, but they're walking between towers made out of encyclopedias. So the encyclopedias are almost kind of metaphorically a reminiscence of the towers of Babel, towers of knowledge that were created. There are a lot of these towers and people walking between them. People are sometimes climbing on rope on wires that are stretched between those towers of books. So the towers of books are defining the environment, and people are in all sorts of scenarios in this gigantic landscape are trying to walk across and through them. I mean, what is interesting, because we filmed in a volumetric way, and because every person is captured with three-dimensional pixels, actually as a visitor, you can also not just walk around them, but walk through the people. And when you walk through, you can see them from their inside. So entire world can open up every time you're entering inside the body. So this whole relationship between in and out is really explored through this experience.
It's an amazingly intense environment. But also, when I think about your work, you talk a lot about poetics, the poetic side of things, and there is this element of beauty that you're creating in this virtual world. And can you speak to that a little bit, and kind of the environment you're trying to create, even though it's virtual?
So, I mean, in terms of aesthetic and pictorial language, you know, I'm always driven, I think, by related values. So it's, I mean, to bring them and to adopt them into the VR, it's a very different world. So you have to imagine the space and understand the capabilities of the medium. But in terms of experience, there are a lot of elements that are very much related to the disintegration of the flowers. There is sometimes a condensation and saturation of detail. So for example, there are places where I scan images from volumes of encyclopedias. So each volume will have 300-400 images, and they are physical again. We scan them from the books and then create them as images and then throw them into the VR. So for example, when a figure is falling from the wires on top of you, the start to disintegrate, but they're turning into a full volume of images from an encyclopedia, and they're kind of spiraling, almost like in helix, sort of a helix-like shape, and you become totally immersed. So you're surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of images that are flying through you while you're kind of moving through the space. And so a lot of the saturation of imagery, of being overwhelmed by information and data, this idea of things are constantly disintegrating and re-emerging, but in a way that it's very, on the one end, it's, you know, it has this kind of chaotic nature, similar to things that I've done with explosion, but at the same time, everything is very harmonious. So these whole elements kind of trying almost to dance around each other. So you're entering a world where there is kind of you hovering between the real and some sort of otherness, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of other series, we were talking about the On Reflection series that you did not too long ago, and kind of how it might have relevance now and this time, and could you speak to that a little bit?
Reflection?
Yeah.
So one of the things that interested me, On Reflection started with, you know, 3 reference images from the 17th century. So I thought, how can I work with this idea? And then I decided to remove it even further from the physical world. So we made the vases, we made the arrangement out of synthetic material. So everything was made out of silk and plastic and so forth. And then to remove it even further, rather than looking at the bouquet itself, I put it in front of a mirror. So what we're photographing or looking at is a reflection of the object itself. And then I explode the mirrors rather than the object itself. And I put 2 cameras beside each other. One camera was looking at the glass, and the second camera was not looking, but focusing. The second camera was focusing on the reflection in the glass. So the glass is the surface, like at the moment we are talking to each other at the screen, and each one of us are looking at the screen, but what I actually look is at you. You are some image inside the screen. You have no physical entity. You're just a spray of electron that makes so much sense that grab all my attention. I forget that there is a screen that is dividing between us. So On Reflection is exactly based on this very same idea. That so one camera was looking at the screen, which was the glass, and the second at the reflection, which is the image that's appearing in the glass. When I shutter the mirror, both cameras are capturing the moment, but each camera is capturing a different reality. So one camera, the focus is on the screen, so the screen is super sharp, and the reflection of the flower, or your image at this instance, becoming very soft, almost like hallucinogenic spray of colors. But the second camera was focusing on your image, on the flowers, but then the glass is completely out of focus or disappeared. So get to reality, the physical and the virtual, that coexisting in a single moment. And the more you come close to one, the further you remove from the other, and vice versa. So the whole work was exploring this relationship between physical and virtual, and where reality really is, and how slippery is the relationship between them. I mean, later I kind of moved and I did a series of work in Tokyo, which titled The Floating World, where there I tried to get the physical and the virtual world collapse upon each other, so you can no longer separate between them. In On Reflection, it's very much a dichotomy. It's like this and that, the material world and the virtual world that are constantly polarizing each other.
I think this is like, I've listened to all of this and I just think this is such an exciting moment in a way in your work, because the timing of what you're doing and what you're working on, kind of what you've been building towards over the past few years with the physical and the virtual, and now moving into the volumetric experience, just when we're all having to be digital, as you say. This moment's kind of pushing us to be in a new world, in a new environment. But I think it's so exciting that you were on this path with your art, and as opposed to being forced into it, like you're not responding to the environment, you were kind of already moving this direction. And it's, like you said, it's a wonderful, in some ways, it's a wonderful time of opportunity, and how we learn to, I think more than anything, how we learn to connect. The fascinating aspect of the VR experience is, even though, as we say, there is social distancing, there's also in the virtual world a connection, and kind of how we're connecting on a Zoom right now. I think we're more connected than we would be just on telephone or just in an email. So there's also kind of this hyper connectivity that's happening. What do you hope to, have you thought about your audience and the viewer, and how you want to connect with your audience through the new work?
It's interesting because it's something, of course, the crisis, COVID-19, kind of came right in the middle. I imagine, and I really like the idea of a physical installation where you experience the virtual within the physical. I started to think that it may not be possible right away because physical restriction. And then I started to think, okay, so how we can create a virtual experience. And one of the interesting thing, and something that I would like to explore, is I can create a key. The way I work is a very high resolution. So of course you can create a virtual experience on your iPhone, but this is totally immersive. You can actually feel the sounds through your body. I mean, there are all sorts of elements which I think that it's really important to maintain. In particular with the volumetric, it's require a lot of memory and kind of and capability. So I was thinking it could be, one opportunity will be that, if you're a gallery and you have a group of collectors or people that are interested in what you're doing, they can actually get the work coming to their home, and they can get the kit, they just put it on, they get it for 2 days, we're working in what way, they can have a full experience. So the gallery, there is an opportunity for the gallery to come to the people. Which I think is so it's kind of becoming some sort of an extension. And, we have a set of 3 or 4 kits, and they can kind of move into enthusiasts, collectors, and so forth. So this is one thing that I was thinking, and I start to explore this as and then how can this be materialized. Another, I start to think about the notion of a social distance exhibition. So if originally I was thinking that the installation will be large and a lot of people will experience it in one space, we started to think about, we've created this very beautiful, I think, book, towers made out of book of encyclopedias. I work with a friend as an architect, and we build these things. So there is a steel pole, and we're putting the encyclopedias through them with the base, so they can start to get all sorts of movement and free flow. And and you can touch and feel them. And we can create little environment. So, in diameter 3 or 4 meters, where the books are at different heights. So you're actually moving into a space where you can experience the VR, and you can, while doing it, you can touch and feel the books, but we can make these independent stations. So let's say, in your gallery, for example, we can make 10 of these, and people can actually come and they can experience something, but maintain physical distance. So multiple people can actually experience something in the physical world, but retaining the physical gaps between them that will prevent any unfortunate, consequences.
Sounds great. Well, Ori, it's been a great conversation. I love hearing about these projects, and I'm excited to know, I'm happy to know that you're able to work, even though, there are challenges all around us, but this is a great time for you and your work as it's developing. And I think in the coming weeks, in the coming months, there will be things to see and wonderful things to follow. And hopefully in the coming year, in 2021, there will be some installations to see this finished work. Don't you think? I hope.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time, and I look forward to talking to you soon. And thank you for doing the Zoom and joining us.